Look at the environmental disaster caused by the clothes and fashion industry. Unreported World comes from Ghana in half an hour. First though, Frei brings us your Friday evening Channel 4 news, which contains distressing images from Ukraine from the start.
Horror on the platform. Refugees in the east of Ukraine killed as they attempt to flee by train. Good evening. A bloody children's rucksack, an empty pram, an abandoned family suitcase, the left luggage of the dead. It is important to remember that those killed in the train station at Kramatorsk are the very people that Russia says it is fighting to protect, Russian speakers from the disputed Donbass region. Instead, they fled from their supposed protectors, and the world believes they were killed by them. The images that follow are highly distressing, but they are important to show what happened and why the world is reacting with outrage. Local officials say that at least 50 were killed, including 5 children, and hundreds were injured as they waited for trains to take them to safety. The Russians deny any responsibility, but more pressure is heaped by the drumbeat of atrocities on Western leaders. Also tonight, the Prime Minister denies leaking damaging information about the tax affairs of his Chancellor's wife and the Chancellor himself.
And at 7:30, Unreported World is in the capital city of Ghana, which is deluged by unsellable fast fashion clothes, many from the UK, creating an environmental disaster which is also ruining livelihoods.
How can I sell it? How can I sell the trash? If you come, will you buy it? You will not buy it.
When history is written of the first 2 months of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the massacre of people waiting to flee at Kramatorsk station will no doubt feature. And like the shelling of the theatre in Mariupol in March, it is following a similar script. First, the slaughter of civilians, many of them children, seeking safety. Then denial by the Russians that the event happened at all, followed by the suggestion that Ukrainians had bombed themselves. Kramatorsk is in the east, where Russia is focusing its military might. Locals had been warned to leave, and thousands were trying to do so at the railway station when it was hit. And a warning, this report from our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, does contain some highly distressing images.
At least one Russian missile, some Ukrainian sources say 2, fired at a railway station crammed with several thousand people, mostly elderly, women and children. A place, and this matters, that Russia knew at least 3 days ago would be crammed with civilians. Among the dead, children.
The enemy, taking into account their means of surveillance, clearly knew that it's a railway station, that it's a town, that there was a gathering of people. The enemy did it to prevent people from leaving the region.
They had been told to leave Kramatorsk and nearby Sloviansk because of the expected Russian eastern offensive.
When people, civilians only, were arriving at Kramatorsk Central Railway Station, a cruise missile, similar to Toch-Ku missiles with cluster munitions, hit.
Someone had written "for the children" on the missile. It means revenge for the children Ukraine is killing, according to Russian state propaganda. Railway officials say several children were among those killed. And the Ukrainian president stated there was categorically no military target at the station. The city's mayor said around 4,000 people had crowded into the station this morning. They'd been advised to leave the city whilst it was still safe, officials supposed, to do so.
Many were killed and injured here, including medics and police. The cars were set on fire, it was hell on earth. They all had shrapnel injuries. This is the kind of shrapnel scattered around.
3 trains carrying evacuees were blocked in the same region of Ukraine on Thursday after an airstrike on the line, according to the head of Ukrainian Railways. That attack marked a change in strategy by Russia, which, until then, had not attacked Ukraine's rail network, still functioning in eastern cities under attack, like Kharkiv, seen here. The Russian Defense Ministry was quoted as saying only Ukraine has missiles of the kind which hit the station. Russia has, during this war, repeatedly accused Ukraine of bombing itself. And in the areas affected by the ground war elsewhere, civilians abused and killed by Russian forces continue to emerge. In the village of Yahidny to the north of the Ukrainian capital, the names of people who died scrawled on the wall, where 300 people were confined here by Russian soldiers when the village was occupied.
The old man died first. He died in the large room, this one. He was transported to the boiler room. He laid there for 2 days, and later, when there was no more gunfire, we were allowed to bring him to his home.
At least 10 civilians died in the conditions here, hundreds forced into a school basement for several weeks of Russian occupation. Meanwhile, in Bucha, northwest of the capital, forensic investigators have begun exhuming bodies of civilians killed during the Russian occupation. Officials here have so far exhumed 20 bodies, and of those, 18 had either gunshot or shrapnel wounds. And it was Bucha that the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen visited today, seeing firsthand at least something of the effect of Russian occupation.
Here in Bucha we saw our humanity being shattered, and it is, the whole world is mourning with the people of Bucha.
Ukraine's message to her and beyond is unchanged. We need weapons, weapons, and weapons.
Well, it's clear, it seems, that this marks a change in Russia's war-fighting strategy, and now railway stations, like hospitals, for instance, are very much on their list of targets. Indeed, hitherto in this war, our Ukrainian friends, when they're asking where we're staying, and we'd say, well, we're staying at a hotel near the railway station in these eastern cities, would say, that's great, that's a safe place. They're not saying that now. So it does mark a change as this eastern offensive builds up from the Russian forces. And let me leave you with one thought to underline. It is a repetition. We've said it in our report tonight, but it is absolutely the case that the Russian army knew that this location would be full of thousands of civilians, and they would have known that fact for several days before they opened fire this morning, with terrible consequences. Back to you.
Alex, thanks very much indeed. Well, earlier today, I spoke to the Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Kira Rudik, and began by asking her for her reaction to the Kramatorsk massacre.
After we have seen what happened in Bucha, after we have seen all the terrible crimes from outskirts of Kiev, we have asked people from the regions where we anticipate the next battles would be to evacuate. And right now, Ukrainian government and local governments are working on evacuating people from there. And we called for people to take the train, buses, everything, so they could get out of there, because we know that Russians would be fighting civilians hard. And on the train station where women and children and elderly were packed, there was this Air Force attack. And this is so terrible, because can you imagine those grandmothers holding their grandchildren, hoping that they will get away and find peace, and then the rocket hits exactly where there is the most of them.
So today, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission, and the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, are both in Kyiv. What do you think they should be doing in response to something like the bombing of the Kramatorsk train station?
We need more weapons, and we need actually heavy weapons that we have requested before so many times, and we need real sanctions. Because you know what is terrible is that for the last 30 days, countries of European Union have paid Russia $35 billion for gas and oil. So it's basically $1 billion a day. Do you think that would be enough for Putin to continue war in Ukraine? I think so. And I do understand that it's complicated for some of the countries to get rid of Russian gas and oil and stop buying it right away, but there should be a plan, at least a plan of like when they will cut Putin off.
So NATO has already...
to happen.
Right. Well, yesterday we heard that NATO has promised you some of the heavy weapons that you want. I think they're in the pipeline. I don't know when they'll come. But when it comes to those sanctions, which have not yet been imposed against oil and gas, yes, for coal, but not oil and gas, do you think that makes the West complicit on one level with what's going on in Ukraine, what the Russians are doing in Ukraine?
Yes. You know, it's always easier to say we do support, we are for you, but when it comes to your own pocket, when it comes to your own country, your own economy, and you need to take actions to step up and to make harsh decisions, it becomes very political. I do understand it. I'm a politician myself, but it needs to be done. Like you see, what we are observing right now is that the world, the democratic world, is just starting to realize that you cannot play with Putin by the rules. He does not play by the rules. What we see right now, that the world is waking up, but it happens very slowly. And we are paying for this waking up with our lives. We are paying with Bucha massacre. We are paying with terrorists, because this is the price for the bureaucratic machines in all the democratic countries to work faster. This is the price for many politicians who hoped there would be an easy solution for actually starting making hard decisions.
The brutal political truth here is that at the end of the day, the European Union is still not prepared to pay the ultimate economic price for limiting Vladimir Putin, and NATO is not prepared to pay the ultimate military price of seeing this war, wash up on NATO's own doorstep. That's the reality here.
Yes, and I have a couple of questions on that. The first one is a question of, it's political one. So are the politicians of all those countries are prepared to pay the price of not acting when the world will continuously see what Putin is doing in Ukraine? And we will be continuously speaking up on saying, if you're paying money to Russia, you, particularly you, a taxpayer from Europe, are paying for our children being killed, for our women being raped. It's not just some magical people, it's you. Second, right now, it's up to 5 million refugees. And you have been to Lviv, you know that. 5 million refugees in Europe. If the war is not ending soon, and I do not believe that it will end soon without sanctions and heavy weaponry, there will be more.
Kira, the war is not going Russia's way. Do you think that you can actually win this war with the weapons that you're getting and will soon get from NATO?
Yes, if we get what we need, we will be able to win.
In the East as well? Sure. Can you push them out of the East, or will you say goodbye to the Donbass forever?
No, we are not going to say goodbye to Donbass. We are not giving up our territories. We will be fighting. And look, even if I told you right now, saying, okay, we are which is not, but if I told you we are willing to give up some territories, we have right now half of the population that is armed. So they will not be able to, they will not allow politicians to make any mistake here.
Kira Rudek, thank you very much indeed. Now, Britain's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has said that the Kramatorsk attack bears all the hallmarks of a war crime. His comments came in Romania at a ceremony at a Black Sea airbase as the UK took command of NATO's air policing mission there. Mr. Wallace told our reporter Paul McNamara that the UK will supply massive armoured vehicles to Ukraine. And back here, the Prime Minister announced a £100 million package for further military aid.
30,000 feet above the lands that border Ukraine, and these skies are filled with NATO planes.
On any given day, about 100 to 130 aircraft from 30
many
different
aircraft
bases.
up in these skies?
Up in these skies, yeah. we've got combat air patrols of combat aircraft, but we've also got intelligence gathering aircraft flying as close to as they can to the Ukrainian borders, gathering information about what we think is going on.
On this flight, kit destined for Romania, kit needed for British Typhoon jets, which, as of today, will take over the NATO air policing mission for the Black Sea region. It's a mission which has got significantly busier recently as the skies nearby have become a Russian jet run for bombing raids on Ukraine, says the Defence Secretary. We've got women, children, civilians being targeted, it appears, at a railway station. Is this a war crime, and how does NATO react to this?
Well, all the signs suggest it's a war crime. We'll collect the evidence, we'll put it to the prosecutors and the investigators, such as the International Criminal Court. But the evidence is gathering to demonstrate that Russia is deliberately doing these acts, and the fact they're just standing and denying it is to add insult to injury.
But how do you react? How do you respond?
Well, I think, first of all, we have responded throughout this process by stepping up our lethal aid supplies, and everyone has stepped up and increased both lethal and non-lethal aid. President Putin and Gerasimov cannot fail to recognise that at the start of this, they had a number of supportive nations for Ukraine. They had some lukewarm nations, and 6 weeks in, or however long it's been, he's now got a huge amount of nations against him, set against him, determined against him, but not just in words, in actions, whether that's stronger sanctions or indeed lethal aid.
How pivotal is it at this stage in the war that Ukraine gets an uplift in lethal aid, in weapons?
It's incredibly important for Ukraine. Russia itself is wearing itself out. Its army in some parts have had to withdraw from, for example, the north of Kyiv, and itself will be looking for supplies to resupply itself, because the next phase, where Russia is clearly going to push from the east, try and connect up to sort of Crimea through the south, it's very important that we make sure that doesn't happen, that they don't consolidate, and indeed that the Ukrainians have the force and capability to push them back.
Australia is sending 20 Bushmaster vehicles to Ukraine. The UK has got an awful lot of similar vehicles, Mastiffs, which we use extensively in Afghanistan.
We will be sending Mastiffs and other armoured vehicles.
How many?
Ukraine. I haven't got the numbers, but we will be sending them.
Is there any limit to the weaponry, to the aid that you'll be supplying to Ukraine?
I'm not going to speculate. I think the simple reality is I speak almost daily to my Ukrainian counterpart, as do others, through NATO and through other bilateral relationships. We try and respond to their requests as much as possible to make sure they have what they need.
Jets from this base have been scrambled almost every other day recently. The threat? Russian fighters taking off from a base in annexed Crimea and skirting the edges of NATO airspace. Crossing that boundary now would be a significant escalation.
Our air forces are ready for that eventuality, and this is
ready to shoot down Russian planes, essentially.
If a Russian aircraft was a threat, or Russia had recklessly chosen to widen the conflict in Ukraine, then our crews are ready.
150.
With every day that passes, the desperate need for military supplies increases. More weapons and now British armoured vehicles will soon be landing in Ukraine. The fear are these sticking plasters where game changers are needed.
10, 5.
Paul McNamara reporting. Now, some breaking news here in the UK. In the last few minutes, it's been reported that the Chancellor of the Exchequer's wife will now pay tax in the UK on her overseas income. Until now, the Chancellor's explanations for his wife not paying UK tax on those earnings has included the suggestion that she has to have non-dom status to remain an Indian citizen. Rishi Sunak also said it's part of a misogynistic smear campaign from his political enemies. The first of these has been questioned by tax experts. As for the second, well, Rishi Sunak's opponents are clearly enjoying his embarrassment, and that includes some of his fellow Tory MPs, but not, apparently, the Prime Minister, who today denied any involvement in any leaking or briefing about his next-door neighbour. Liz Bates reports.
Leaving Downing Street this morning, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, was hidden behind blacked-out windows. But what he can't get away from, criticism of his family's finances. Today he used the Sun newspaper to defend his wife's non-dom status. Linked to her Indian citizenship, it enables her to save millions by not paying tax in the UK on income earned abroad. He said, "To smear my wife to get at me is awful. She loves her country like I love mine. Every single penny that she earns in the UK, she pays UK taxes on. And every penny that she earns internationally, for example, in India, she would pay the full taxes on that." With speculation in Westminster that the Chancellor's next-door neighbour could be behind the briefings, it was put to him at today's Downing Street press conference.
Did you know that Rishi Sunak's wife was a non-dom yourself? And there were reports today that people close to you, people in number 10, have been briefing against the Chancellor. What would you say to them?
Number one, no. Number two, if there are such briefings, they're certainly not coming from us in number 10. Heaven knows where they are coming from.
Mr Sunak may have hoped that that was the end of it, but further revelations have since emerged. That he held a US green card up until October last year whilst he was Chancellor, committing him to file taxes there and to becoming a US citizen in future. When his wife's financial affairs first came into the spotlight last week, Mr Sunak said he was so upset he felt like Will Smith at the Oscars.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth!
Speaking up for him today were his Conservative colleagues, with some implying that the criticism was racially motivated.
But can I just say, I think some of the commentary about this has become a little bit unpleasant. Some of the attacks on her for being a foreign national, some of the commentary here, I think, has got an unpleasant tinge to it.
The cash comes from her billionaire father and her £690 million stake in his technology company, Infosys. Last year, she reportedly earned $11.6 million in dividends. She would have paid almost 40% of that in UK tax, but her non-dom status meant the Treasury didn't get a penny. It's all perfectly legal, but that hasn't stopped the criticism.
I think that people who say that there's some sort of xenophobia attached to this are absolutely clutching at straws. There are plenty of people with Indian passports in the UK who don't declare themselves non-dom, who pay all their taxes.
So what does this mean for brand Rishi, the Chancellor who carefully curates his public image via slick social media posts and enjoyed huge popularity during the pandemic?
What I think has taken lots of figures in Westminster, including Tory MPs, by surprise, is how quickly his star has fallen. And depending on how the Chancellor handles this, there will be some, and already hearing it, asking, is it sustainable to have a person who is in charge of taxation across the country facing questions about their own household's tax affairs?
Responding to the Green Card allegations this evening, a Treasury spokesperson said all laws and rules have been followed and full taxes have been paid.
And Liz has more.
Yes, Matt, well, things have all changed just in the last few minutes. That's because it's been reported by the BBC that Rishi Sunak's wife has said that she will now pay UK tax on all the income she earns abroad. This is a statement from the BBC in which she says that she is aware that her tax arrangements were not compatible or seen to be not compatible with a British sense of fairness. She did not want her tax status to be a distraction for her husband and to affect her family. She added, "I do this because I want to, not because the rules require me to." This will, of course, as you've just seen, provide millions extra in pounds every year for the Treasury. We also understand that she will retain her Indian citizenship and her non-dom status.
Liz Bates, thanks very much. Now, the leader of Plaid Cymru, Adam Price, has said that his party will accelerate the rollout of free school meals and tackle the housing crisis in Wales. He was speaking at the launch of Plaid's local election campaign and said that his party would commit to introducing a cap on the number of second homes and holiday homes. Plaid controls 4 councils in Wales and is aiming to make gains in the elections on the 5th of May.
We wish that we had a Westminster government that was far more caring and compassionate than the one we've got. That's not going to change in these elections, but what we can do is elect local councillors, Plaid Cymru councillors and Plaid Cymru councils.
In Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon launched the SNP's campaign accusing the Prime Minister of disgraceful inaction on the cost of living crisis. She said it has left people terrified to open their bills and go to the supermarket, and she urged voters to send a message to Boris Johnson that Scotland has had enough of what she said was an incompetent, sleaze-ridden government.
But at this time of the severe cost of living crisis, delivering misery for individuals and families across the country, this is a time to send the clearest possible message to out-of-touch Boris Johnson, particularly out-of-touch Rishi Sunak, that they need to wake up to this crisis and do more to help people across the country.
The man who murdered primary school teacher Sabina Nessa as she walked through a London park has been jailed for a minimum of 36 years. Kochi Selamaj was caught on CCTV as he waited for a lone woman in Kilbrook before he attacked the 28-year-old in September of last year. He refused to attend the sentencing hearing at the Old Bailey today, and the judge said that he had not shown any remorse for his act of evil. Minnie Stevenson reports.
Sabina Nessa was kind, bright, engaged in the world around her, and absolutely dedicated to the children she taught. The words of those who knew the primary school teacher. She had, they said, the whole world at her feet. When Kochi Salamanch murdered the 28-year-old at random in what was described as a sadistic and sexually motivated attack. Today, her killer refused to attend court to face Sabina Nessa's family, as the judge sentenced him to life in prison, saying Selamaj took pleasure from the murder and had shown no remorse. Despite his absence, her family directly addressed her murderer. "You had no right to take her away from us in such a cruel way. You are not a human being. You are an animal." Sabina Nessa's family walked out of court as we were played CCTV of the moment Kochi Selamaj attacked the 28-year-old, preying on her as she walked alone. We also learned that he had a history of domestic violence, and although he wasn't known to police, his ex-wife has since told officers that he throttled her on several occasions before she walked out of the marriage just weeks before he murdered Sabina Nessa. Her family have said it's impossible to find any words to describe the unimaginable pain. This week, they chose these.
My sister was funny, lovable, caring. She was very opinionated as well. She had a good heart. Sister called me. She couldn't get hold of me, so she called my husband. And then obviously I knew something was wrong on the phone, like, just tell me what it is. And then he told me, and I was like, my whole world just crumbled down.
It was a Friday night in September last year when Kochi Selamaj drove from his home in Eastbourne to London's Kidbrooke area. There he waited for a woman walking alone in this park. Minutes away, at around 8:30, Sabina Nessa leaves her home to meet a friend at a local restaurant. A journey which should have taken 5 minutes, but she never arrived. The murder was premeditated. CCTV shows the killer trawling the aisles of Sainsbury's to buy a rolling pin, which he later swaps for this metal traffic triangle. Kochi Salamanch follows Sabina Nessa before hitting her 34 times over the head with the object and strangling the 28-year-old. Her body was found, partially clothed, by a passerby the next day.
This is one of the worst investigations I've ever investigated. As to what makes him tick, why he went to the Kidbrooke area and why he targeted Sabina, I don't know. And unfortunately, it might be questions that we will never know.
After he murdered the primary school teacher, he returned to a hotel in Eastbourne. CCTV shows him checking in earlier that day. A week later, Kochi Selamaj is still at large, and police release this image of him leaving the scene. It proves crucial. 2 days after, Selamaj is arrested and taken into police custody. Sabina Nessa's murder by a stranger moved thousands to come out for vigils in her name. Just a few months after the killing of Sarah Everard and sisters Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry. All were killed by strangers on our streets. Sabina Nessa was murdered just weeks before her 29th birthday. Her family said the moment they were told Sabina had been killed, their world shattered.
Minnie Stevenson reporting. An emotional Dame Cressida Dick has been given a Guard of Honour as she left Scotland Yard for the final time. She left the role of Metropolitan Police Commissioner after a series of scandals and the accusation that she failed to get a grip on racism and sexism within the ranks. She was the first female commissioner, but left the post after failing to convince London's Mayor Sadiq Khan that she could lead the Met. Tennis star Boris Becker could face up to 7 years in jail after he was found guilty in a London court of transferring hundreds of thousands of pounds from his business accounts following his 2017 bankruptcy. The three-time Wimbledon champion was also convicted of failing to declare a property in Germany, hiding a £700,000 bank loan and shares in a tech firm. The former world number one told a jury how his £38 million career earnings were swallowed up by an expensive divorce to his first wife, Barbara, child maintenance and payments, and an expensive lifestyle commitment. Tonight's main news, the world has reacted in horror at the distressing images of the deadly rocket attack on a railway station in the east of Ukraine that killed 50. 5 children were amongst the dead and 100 people were injured. The United Nations has condemned the attack on civilians who were waiting to be evacuated from Kramatorsk station as Russia stepped up its offensive in the region. That's all we have time for this evening. Thanks for watching. We're back at 5:45 tomorrow evening. Until then, that's Channel 4 News. Have a great weekend.